Earlier I caught up and had a cup of tea on Zoom with the one and only David Miliband, President of the International Rescue Committee, and asked him what he is seeing on the ground and what he would like to see happen.
Well, Swarzy, thank you so much for having me to the launch. I'm really sorry I can't be there in person, but it's great to be able to make a contribution, and I love the idea of doing it through a conversation as well. The International Rescue Committee is a global humanitarian charity focused on victims of conflict and the climate crisis and disaster. And we work in basically the countries on the anvil of this famine and hunger crisis. We recently published our emergency watch list for 2023 for this year, and it details the 20 countries at greatest humanitarian risk. And the top of that list is Somalia, because the gap between needs and resources is greatest in that country. And Somalia is a very good example of the telltale signs of famine. Don't take my word for it or just the anecdotes of our doctors and nurses and community health workers. You can go to the UN website and you can see that 380,000 people in the world, many of them concentrated in Somalia, are at international phase classification level 5, which means famine-like conditions. Now, 30 million are at level 4, which essentially means they don't know where their next meal is coming from. So that's quite a level of emergency. And that broadens the lens beyond just Somalia or just Burkina Faso. And it takes in other countries in East Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, but it also takes you to Yemen, it takes you to Afghanistan, it takes you to Mali as well as Chad. And so you've got the evidence from the ground in the statistics as well as in the anecdotes that famine, which is ultimately the greatest political failure that anyone could preside over, is stalking the land, and high levels of food emergency, malnutrition, which have lifelong effects on kids, and the statistics and the experience shows it affects women as well more than men. So there's a gender dimension to this. The statistics are clear that we're in a worse situation at almost every phase. I mean, if you broaden the lens even further, you can see that the number of people who the World Food Programme classifies as being undernourished and being in food insecurity has tripled over the last 3 years.
Looking at the UK then, and historically the UK's played its part tackling global malnutrition and hunger as well, but given all the recent cuts to international development, this has meant the UK has stepped back. But why do you think it's really important for the UK to play its part?
Well, I think there's a leadership void, and so that is the reason that someone has to step up. Now, the UK has skills and assets and record that are historically important. I mean, in 2016-17, there was a threat of famine again in Somalia, and the UK, not in the government I was part of, as a Conservative government, but they stepped up well, not just with money, but with leadership, with convening other actors to play their part, other donors, but other teams on the ground. And in a way, in 2016-17, the lessons were learned of the 2011 famine. The interesting thing about that famine, or one interesting thing, is that half the people who died, 250,000 people died, half the people died before the famine was declared by the UN. And that led to a range of reforms. And what happened in 2016-17 is that those reforms were acted upon. There was there were the projections, and the projections led to action. What's happened over the last 3 or 4 years with successive failed rains in East Africa, the projections are a famine, but no one's doing anything. And so I think there is an opportunity for the UK to step up, but it's going to have to step up with actions, not just words. The funding cuts are having a real impact. If you look at the latest humanitarian aid numbers, the UK is going down, but the US is going up, the EU is going up. Japan's gone up actually the most on humanitarian aid. They've traditionally been a development aid spender. So there's a dilemma for the UK, but I think that in the round, the numbers are actually small compared to the good that you can do and the damage that you can avoid. And the UK does have a range of interested parties, as well as a record that in the right circumstances and in the right leadership could help it get help it get listened to. Just to finish the answer, I think there is an opportunity for the UK more broadly, and something called the High-Level Task Force on Famine, which was set up by the UN, we think can be rebooted and re-energized, and we'd like to see the UK as a permanent member of the Security Council playing its part in that.
My last two questions, and maybe the second one, is just a little bit more hard and more close to heart. But given that politics, for when we see it as young people, we think, oh, there's so much that divides us. There is so many different voices and so many loud voices competing. But given that the general election is coming up, surely we can make this a focal part of the general election to say, can we make ending malnutrition a cross-party consensus? Surely that can happen. And for yourself, on a personal note, why do you care so much?
Well, I mean, you can't be I don't think you can be a human being who's seen someone who's malnourished without just your heart and your head thinking, I've got to do something about this. So in terms of, I mean, when I think about, I made a trip to Yemen some years ago, and it's just shattering what you see really as a result of conflict and just stupidity in some ways, and sort of blinkered behavior. I think the wider point about politics is an interesting one. I mean, politics should have divisions that give people a choice, otherwise they haven't got a choice. But it also needs to find unity, and unity is important on issues like this. And I think David Cameron is in the audience or is speaking at this conference. I mean, it'd be interesting to ask him. One of the things that happened between 2000 and 2018, really 16-18, is that there was cross-party agreement on the importance of international aid, but also aid well delivered and reforms. If young people are saying we want a choice at an election, but we also want some unity and some continuity on things that are morally and politically important for the country's not just self-image, but for its contribution to a better world, not just a better Britain. And I really hope that this launch today and the campaign around it raises people's sights, because there's a danger that politics is small when the issues are big, and politics needs to be big in answering big issues.
Yeah, I'm really hopeful this will be something to unite over and definitely not to divide. David, thank you so much for your insights. Thank you for joining us. And for all of us here at United Against Malnutrition and Hunger, here at the launch and beyond, we wish you very best for you and your team as well. Speak soon.
Thank you very much, and really honoured to be part of it, and congratulations for the launch.